We're so thankful that you're all here. This is probably one of the larger groups we've seen come in here for a while that's not been for a funeral, so it's nice to see some folks in here. I know many of you. If I have not met you, I'm sorry. My name is Bobby Brawley. I'm the Executive Director for Historic Cane Hill. We're thrilled that you're here today to see what's going on, to learn about the history of the church, and we're thrilled to be the new stewards of this building, and we do truly consider ourselves the stewards of the building. We don't really think like that we own the building. It's our job to take care of this building. We want to be the steward for the next 190 years. We want to make sure that we take care of it. So it's going to be here for the next 190 years. Our role then is to take care of this thing, and we're happy that the local congregation is going to continue to meet here. It's part of our arrangement with them. We want it to be an active site, so you'll be able to still come to church here on Sundays, and it's going to be nice to see some of that. The church here, if you're unfamiliar with it, Cane Hill obviously is the first permanent settlement in Northwest Arkansas. That's a pretty biggie, folks. It's considered kind of the epicenter of the first growth here of Northwest Arkansas. So before 1850, if people said they were coming to town, it meant that they were coming to Cane Hill to do their shopping. And the streets were lined with shops down there. Most of them are gone. From 1850 to about 2010, if you said you were going to town, it meant you were going to Fayetteville. And now if you say you're going to town, it means you're going to Benton County to go do your shopping anymore. So things change, but Cane Hill and this church specifically are like the beginning spokes of development on a wheel, a wagon wheel is kind of the way to look at it. The first settlers were Cumberland Presbyterians, and so there's obviously no joking aside that this church literally represents that first initial settlement, those Cumberland Presbyterians coming from East Tennessee and Eastern Kentucky to spread the gospel on horseback. Obviously this church wasn't here, but this congregation goes back well into the 1820s, and so we're happy to be part of that history now. This is an excellent program today. I can't tell you how cool it is. David Ellis, that'll give the history talk later on, literally wrote the book, The Presbyterians of Cane Hill. So you can't ask for a better speaker today, and I'm thankful for Rita for coming today and to give us a devotion, and that's a very fitting thing. And so it's my honor now to turn it over to John Greer. He's our architect. He works for WER Architects out of Little Rock, and he is also our director of our board for Historic Cane Hill. If you've got questions, pull me aside. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, or pull John aside or any of our other board members. We'll be happy to answer questions after the program, or pull us aside if you've got questions. So, John, thank you.
Thanks, Bobby. It's always a pleasure to come to Cane Hill. I tell my wife that Cane Hill is my happy place because it's such a joy to get out of the hustle and bustle of the city and come to a place where you can really engross yourself in a history that's unique to Arkansas. Our firm, we have a 25-person firm in Little Rock, and I'm the managing principal for the preservation division of that group. We were involved in the restoration of the college. We've been involved in the bean house, a little bit working with Bobby on the manse, and there's just a wealth of preservation projects here. This is my next exciting project, and I want to tell you a little bit about how we start a project and the progress that we make. It's sometimes slow, but it's very deliberate. Our first step is to do a condition assessment, and we are in the middle of that now. We have been in the building. I have been in the attic, in the crawl space. I love to get dirty in these buildings because there's so much to find out and so much discovery. So we're in the discovery phase, and that will last a few more weeks. And then once we have developed all the information, the research, and David has been a real asset with what he has already compiled for us, we'll take his information, we'll take our discovery information from our on-site investigations of the church, and then we'll put that into a scope of work. And we'll develop a process of going through this restoration and what would be the impact for the church and for things that are going on. This will be a top to bottom restoration. Our goal is to restore the exterior, interior, and utilize this as a church and as a space that can be multi-use and multi-functions with the opportunities and events that are going on in Cane Hill. That process, again, once we develop that scope of work, we develop the funding paths There's a couple of different avenues for getting the money together, because we're talking about a project that will be well over $1 million to do the restoration. So it's not a small undertaking, and we have to put a lot of people together to get that funding source put together and in line for this. Once we develop that path and we have the approval to move forward, we'll develop the drawings. Well, in that stage of the project, we still have a little more discovery. One of the things that we discovered during our investigation was some decorative treatments in here. And afterwards, if you come look at this door, this is a door that was hand decorated. It was grained, which means that it was painted to look like a more expensive wood. It's a very inexpensive wood door that has a base color of paint, and then it has graining. And there were decorative painters that traveled around Arkansas in the 1800s that was their specialty. And they would come in and do graining on doors, and they would do stenciling on the walls. And so we have found evidence of that, which leads us into an investigation of the wallpapers. This is a wallpaper that was changed out. We have documentation that David found in some of the session minutes that it was changed out in the 50s. This would not have been a high Gothic style wallpaper of the 1890s. It would have been more decorative. There would have been more color in here. So you can tell we're still putting all of this together in some of the things that we have found. But the goal here is for the church to continue to meet on a regular basis. Even when we get started, more than likely we will start on the exterior. That would be the first phase. We would disconnect, separate the fellowship hall from the church so that we could do a full exterior restoration. And then we would move inside. So that allows the fellowship hall to operate independently. It has its own mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems. So the church can meet in the fellowship hall temporarily till we finish the work in the church itself. So we're very excited again to be working in tandem with the church and with the group at Historic Cane Hill to bring this church back to something that is sought after and would be great for tourists and people to come see. Thank you very much.
Hear these words of St. Paul from his epistle to the Romans. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in suffering. Persevere in prayer. After all this time, the Cane Hill congregation of today, like the congregations of the past, still rejoices in hope, is still patient in suffering, and still perseveres in prayer. I sometimes wonder what men like James Buchanan, William Larimore, Jesse Blair, I wonder what they thought when they first arrived in Cane Hill. Such a beautiful, untamed area, ripe for the teaching of God's Word. In those difficult pioneer days, there had to have been many challenges. So surely you could call them dedicated, determined, and blessed with plenty of perseverance. We often forget the power of perseverance, what it means to struggle through hard times, challenging times, to provide a spiritual base for a community. And such an interesting base it proved to be. 3 different Presbyterian churches, a civil war to deal with, mysterious fires, the merging and dissolving of congregations. But they persevered. So for a moment, let's just go back in time to try to understand some of those early challenges. 1843, the congregation splits because the pastor is a Mason. 1861, the churches plural, closed due to the Civil War. 1864, Cane Hill College destroyed by fire. 1885, another fire. 1905, churches disagree over mergers, and the denomination reorganizes. Yes, there were many adventures along the way, but there was always rejoicing in hope, patience through all the suffering, and strong persevering in prayer. A Presbyterian church still exists in Cane Hill. I believe the reason why can be found in the persevering spirit of every congregation that has ever worshiped in this place. From 1828 to 2018, St. Paul's words to the Romans have been a call to action for these determined saints. Rejoice in hope, be patient in suffering, persevere in prayer. Today we see around us witness to their determination. The historic Cane Hill Presbyterian Church, still a witness to the love of God, the peace of Jesus Christ, and the communion of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you. Boy, I just wish we could get this many for a church service.
Me too.
But August 30th of this year was the 190th anniversary of the founding of Cane Hill Congregation of the Cumberland Presbyterian Church. That church first met at a location near the cemetery in a log cabin. And it was organized by Jesse Blair and W.T. Larimore, both Cumberland Presbyterian preachers. Jesse Blair met a sad end during the Civil War when he was hanged by bushwhackers. And W.T. Larimore had a very colorful life. Just to touch on it a little, he first came to Arkansas living in the Natural Dam area. He never lived in Cane Hill as far as we know. And he moved to Fayetteville and was an active real estate speculator in the 1840s. Around the end of the 1840s, he went to Texas and died there in 1853. So the Cane Hill congregation met at the cemetery site for a few years. Then when the Cane Hill School got its own building, it began meeting in the school building. In 1843 and 4, there was a split in the congregation. The pastor was a Mason, and about half the congregation thought that was a very bad thing. There had been a murder in New York City a year or two before that, and the Masons were blamed for that in some circles. Apparently that's the reason for the prejudice. About half of the congregation thought it was just fine, so the congregation split, and the part that hired a new pastor moved to the north of town, became known as the White Church, and they remained Cumberland throughout their existence. The other part reorganized in 1844 and met in what was the Cane Hill School Chapel then, later on the Cane Hill College Chapel. The property north of town was sold by the Delaps to the Cane Hill congregation of the Cumberland Presbyterian Church. There's a deed dated 1877. Apparently they occupied the land several years before that, though. The part of the congregation that stayed in the college chapel was known as Salem congregation. And they were Cumberland up through 1905, at which time there was a national merger, but I'm getting a little ahead of myself. In 1861-5, both churches and the college closed for the duration of the war, about 5 years. And in 1864, incidentally 2 years after the Battle of Cane Hill, most of the town was burned, which included the college. Most of the town and almost all the houses were burnt in 1864. When the soldiers came back from the war, they built a new Cane Hill College building. It was ready to go by 1866, and the Salem congregation resumed meeting there. Apparently, the Cane Hill congregation didn't suffer from the burning that took place in 1864. In the next event is 1885. There was an arsonist that burnt the Cane Hill College, which is where the Salem church met. This is a private arsonist, as opposed to the federal troops during the Civil War. Purportedly a bootlegger that had been asked to leave town came back for his revenge and burned down the college. But that last can't be verified, just a story that gets passed down. In 1889, a third church begins in the area, which is a different denomination. It's the Southern Presbyterian Church. So after 1889, we have two Cumberlands and a Southern Presbyterian. The Southern Presbyterian Church was formed in 1889, met with the Salem congregation for the first 2 years while they were building this building. It was ready for occupancy by 1892. The arch out front says 1891. But an article by H.P. Moore in the flashback, and H.P. Moore was here when it was happening, says that it was 1892 before they actually occupied the building. And we know that there was a presbytery meeting here during 1892 in the summers, so it had to have been done by then. There are two things that happened about 1890. One is the Cane Hill College closed. F.R. Earle had been president for most of its existence, and he was president at its demise. We don't have an exact date, but around 1890 or 91. And at the same time, the Cumberland College of the Ozarks opened in Clarksville, now called University of the Ozarks. It's widely believed that that's a continuation of Cane Hill College. The man that wrote the dissertation on Cane Hill College, Robert Basham, said that there wasn't any direct link between the two, that one stopped and the other started in the same year. So that hasn't been decided yet. Also in 1890, the white church was burnt by an arsonist. No idea if it was the same arsonist, but it was rebuilt the following year. And that was what became known as the White Church, on property that had formerly belonged to William D. Lapp, about 3 miles north of town. In 1905, the Northern Presbyterian Church and Cumberland's merged at the national level, which meant that the Salem congregation then became Northern Presbyterian, called Presbyterian USA, as opposed to Presbyterian US, which was Southern. A significant minority of the Cumberland churches dissented from the merger. About a third of the Cumberland churches dissented and reformed a different Cumberland denomination. The white church was one of those. So from 1905 until 1919, we could say we had 3 Presbyterian churches of 3 different denominations in Cane Hill. The Cumberland church was the white church, the Southern church was in this building, and the Northern church met at the college chapel. In 1919, the Southern church meeting in this building had a decline in membership and decided to dissolve. And there was a 3-way transaction then. The Cane Hill School Board wanted the college building for public school, which had already been meeting there. The Northern Presbyterian Church, which had been the Salem congregation and became known as First Presbyterian in 1905, wanted a real church building, which was now available here. And so the school board paid First Church for the college building, and the I'm getting tongue-tied. The First Church turned around and paid the money to Mount Bethel for this building. So we had the school board, the First Presbyterian, and the Mount Bethel Church in a 3-way transaction. A lot of the members of the Mount Bethel Church stayed on and became members of the USA Church that continued to meet here. There was one man that was an elder in both churches for many years, named Lon Moore, who was a father of Martha Elizabeth Moore, which many of you know. In about 1942, the white church dissolved. We don't have an exact date on that. It just sort of dwindled. It's last mentioned in the Cumberland records about 1942. So at that point, we have one Presbyterian church in Cane Hill, which is the Cane Hill Presbyterian that meets here. The First Presbyterian gradually became known as Cane Hill Presbyterian, no date. It was just kind of a gradual transition in name. And finally, in 2018, we made a deal with Historic Cane Hill, and we're looking forward to the next chapter in the history. I'll be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Church in Clyde, does that have anything to do with Presbyterians?
Not directly, but they did share a pastor with Cane Hill quite often. Reverend Skinner preached here for many years and also preached at Clyde. And there were times when the church would only meet here once a month and the Clyde church would meet the other times. But there was never a formal connection between the two.
Yeah, the membership, how big was the membership in some, like in its high water mark and like low water mark? The Cumberland
Well,
Presbyterian.
I'd say we're at the low water mark now.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
With less than 10, but during the 1950s, there were about 100 members.
David, on your 1942 white church ceased meeting and the building was dismantled. Where does that come from? What's that reference? Do you know off the top of your head?
Let me see. Jewel Truitt wrote a letter.
That's interesting.
Yeah, the date comes from Cumberland Records. I looked through, every year they list all the Cumberland churches in Arkansas, and it was listed through 42, but no pastor listed after 1940.
David, I was wondering about the panels that separate the sanctuary from the room on the other side. About how long has it been since they have been raised? And I remember attending a funeral service here when they did raise them.
I believe that funeral service was the last time.
Was it during?
Yeah, Howard's funeral. We
Howard.
had them up then.
But they're still operable to.
Yes, they were designed with counterweights so you could just maybe give it a flick and it would go up, but those are long since missing, and now it takes two pretty strong guys, one on each end, to lift it up and a third one to put a pole under it once it's up.
I was also wondering about the rectangular piano, how long it had been in the church here, and how it happened to be in the church. Do you know when it was brought here?
No, I don't think. Betty, do you know
What's that question?
when that square grand was brought into the building here, and who brought it? Do you remember a time when it wasn't here?
Yes, I do. I remember that. Yeah.
All right, so that puts I believe it was about 51 when Betty came here, and so 52, okay, so sometime between then, and I know it was here when I came here, the late 80s.
Speaking of the annex, we call it the annex building, that's what you're talking about? Oh, the piano, no, I remember when they moved it down here from the college.
That was in the college?
It was that.
This big piano?
This big piano was on top of the college, and then they thought it would be better cared for here, so they
Oh.
moved it down here.
All right. Yeah,
So just to get it straight, this was originally the Mount Bethel Church.
that's right.
Okay. And do you have any idea what's under the wallpaper?
Well,
Plaster on wood slabs.
White?
yeah, the article on Mount Bethel from Flashback says plaster.
And is the wood up here and the wood on the sides and the wood on the floor original?
It is, yes.
Yeah, the carpet's not.
The floors, the majority of the wood is pine ceilings with pine floors and walls, but the altar, the pulpit, is black walnut, correct, David?
That's right.
And was crafted by a local furniture maker when the church opened. It's probably one of our most original pieces of furniture here.
And the pews, are the pews newer?
They're newer, yeah,
Probably
early
original.
70s. I believe 72.
Do you know what the original furniture looked like?
There is a pew in the museum, correct?
I think the one in front of the museum is one of the originals.
The one
It's inside the museum.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
I remember the comment from the Flashback article was that the pews were designed to make it very uncomfortable to slouch, to encourage people to sit up straight. Yeah.
Is that something that will that go back to the original pews?
We're talking about that. Of course, that has a cost impact as anything, but ideally, we would like to, when you walk into the space, we would like you to feel like it was 1891 with the exception of the stained glass. Stained glass windows were added in the 50s. Those are not original to the building. The original glass was clear. It was double hung windows with arched top. The Gothic tops were just fixed glass, but it was a clear glass windows around the building.
Any other questions?
You've obviously done a lot of research. I'm curious as to what you have looked at, and is that public records that anybody could access?
They're all public, but some of them are session records, which can technically be seen by anybody, but they belong to the church, so you'd have to ask to see them. Other things are Presbyterian records that are stored at the archives of the Southern Presbyterian, Northern Presbyterian, and Cumberland. Their archives have the Presbyterian records, and I got microfilms on loan. Back when I was writing the book, I got the microfilms to look at. Sometime around 1910, this choir riser was built, and they somehow managed to get a pipe organ there along with the pews. So they must have been smaller pews or a very small pipe organ. But Dr. Blackburn donated the pipe organ. Bought at Guy Singer's. Would be very interesting to look at their archives, which I haven't done. Anything else?
When did they remove the piano from the choir loft?
Oh, the organ, you mean? I don't think there was ever a piano up there.
Yes, there was.
Oh, all right. Okay, I don't know.
It's right under that picture up there.
Okay, that was done before I got here, and I never heard a date on removing the piano.
It's just under the picture in the parlor.
Okay.
Alice Pike used to play it. They also had, had benches in the parlor, but I remember piano did sit under that picture.
Well, I'm learning some things. All right.
Are we ready to be dismissed?
Let Rita close with a prayer.
Father, bless us now as we go out into the world to be a witness and to work for you, always persevering in prayer. Amen.
Amen.